So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next installment of the live series Roundtable events. This is a series that connects some of the world's top engineering leaders to engage in the discussion on hot topics. My name is Sam. As you know by now, I work for Amicus. We're a specialist technical recruitment agency focusing on JavaScript, Python, Golang, machine learning, and Rust across Europe and the US. So today's Roundtable event is going to cover the topic of shedding light on common leadership mistakes made by emerging or newly appointed managers. I'm very excited to be joined by some of the top engineering leaders from across the UK. First of all, we have Eoin McCarthy, CTO at Edyn. Secondly, we have Ed Strickland. Ed is currently a CTO for Launchpad. And last but not least, we have Sirius, who is the Director of Technology, and he goes by Mike. So to get us kind of kick-started, I suppose we'll go around the room, kind of introduce ourselves. So first of all, Eoin, if you want to introduce where you're working and your kind of current position, responsibilities, and kind of how many people you're responsible for at the moment.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm Eoin. I'm the CTO at Edyn Care, which is it's a social care company. I'm more of a tech-enabled company than a pure tech company, I'd say. Yeah, I've been like leading the tech team there for about 3 years, and the company's about 5 years old. It's quite small. So in the tech team, there's 3 other engineers and me. So not a big team at all. And yeah, I've been doing kind of web tech for about 8 years or something. So starting with JavaScript and all things web, and slowly getting to where I am now, I guess. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And Ed, if you'd like to kind of explain your situation at the moment.
Hi. So just a point of clarification, I'm actually an engineering expert. I guide CTOs rather than being a CTO. So I'm Ed Strickland. I'm euphemistically termed an engineering expert. I work for BP Launchpad. We are a startup accelerator within a large corporate. And I've been shepherding for the last couple of years or so, last 3 or 3.5 years now. I've been shepherding 7 different technology and emergent technology companies through the growing pains of going from sort of small teams through to 40 to 50 engineers plus in each of the companies, and scaling them up and growing, and largely doing everything from a bit of infrastructure management through to architecture, through to getting my hands dirty and having to do some back-end code and some front-end code, and a little bit of working on C and some edge devices and things like that. Largely, historically, I've been scaling up teams and growing engineering teams and putting best practices in place.
Nice. Thank you for that, Ed. And Mike, if you'd like to continue.
Of course. Hey, everyone. I'm Mike Sirius. I'm quite experienced tech lead with 25 years or so in technology. Last decade, I've been working exclusively with startup, various stages, early startups, Series A, just after Series A, effectively helping, mainly scale the tech and the teams, but it's always technically leaning. But if you've ever been part of startups, you know that as a co-founder, you wear many hats. So there's a lot of products, a lot of marketing, sales, even customer support as well. So really everything goes, but mainly it's a tech, and mainly it's people, processes, and technology.
That's fantastic. I suppose to kick us off, I suppose you've all been leaders for quite a while now. In your careers, when you were kind of working up the ladders, was there any particular moment the manager might have been managing you and you that's kind of stuck with you and you've either continued it in your own career, or you kind of went completely against it and it was more of a negative thing? Mike, has it ever affected you?
What's the beginning of the question, Sam? Because if something stuck with me, as in good or bad, but what was the beginning of the question? Sorry.
In your career so far, like when you were growing up, or when you were just an average kind of developer engineer, was there a moment a manager had with you that kind of has stuck with you to this day?
Oh yeah, what stuck with me is the mistakes I did when I transitioned from individual contributor to an actually leading a team. And I feel like this topic is so great to discuss, because no one prepared me for these roles, and I've seen that all the time when you go through your career and you become just better and better, with the technologies you represent, and you become a senior engineer, and effectively everybody comes to you with all the questions, and business sees this, and eventually they go like, hey, how about you take this team and you become a lead for their team, and suddenly you're in a different room. It's just a different ball game when it comes to actually being individual contributor and actually leading a team of 6 or 8. And no one really prepares you, and you're gonna make mistakes. So one of the biggest mistakes I did is just not relinquishing the control and failing to delegate effectively my position, and just sort of trying to oversee everything, and almost not planned, became always like a micromanager. I imagine that I'm going to be overseeing the quality of a code, so I need to oversee everything, and all that. So what stuck with me is that none of my leaders really told me that that's going to happen, and I should watch out for that. So I learned that the hard way, spending a year or so, and it's just not being a good leader really when I started. So that's what stuck with me.
And Owen, do you have was there anything in your career, because since you're kind of more at this almost the start of your leadership and your CTO level, is it probably a bit more recent that you were underneath an engineering manager? Was there any moment in particular for you that kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I won't call it a moment in time, but certainly a manager. It was kind of halfway through my career, I guess, and it was the first time I was in a more serious engineering org, going away from freelancing and tiny little kind of early stage startups. So it's kind of 20 senior engineers in this company, but it was total chaos, and there was just kind of a lot going on, and I was a little bit out of my depth in lots of ways. And the guy who's running me was kind of running the whole team, and he was just always completely calm. And every 2 weeks we sat and chatted for an hour. And he never kind of asked me about what I was working on. He just asked me about how I was doing, and had this very kind of hands-off, kind of calm, nice style. And it's been my template ever since, of just kind of having your one-to-ones as just like a space to build relationships and like be nice to your people and like foster them and this kind of stuff. So I think he stuck with me more than any other manager. And whenever I'm kind of in doubt, I kind of think like, oh, well, what would he have done? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important as well, having those one-to-ones and being able to take the time to speak to everyone in every career, not just engineering. I think it's those relationships are like you said, they're things that last. I remember managers that I've worked for in retail or anything who might have had a bad effect on me, and it lasts for years without you knowing really. But yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. Yourself, Ed, is there any do you have anything to add to get at that point?
Yeah, I think two things that stuck with me, two different managers. The first one, his favorite phrase was, don't try and boil the ocean. Fundamentally, you can't get it all done today. So work out what is the highest priority for today and deliver that well, and then work out what the next priority is for tomorrow, and so on and so forth. And the second point would be work out your circle of influence. That is basically pretty much leadership 101. But you are not going to be able to have the same conversations you have with engineers, with board level, with C-level. And so work out your circle of influence and how to exert that influence in the right way, in the positive way, so that you can actually put engineering first, so you can put the product first, so that you can develop that to actually you speak in a different way. We tend to speak with engineers when we huddle down in a place probably we're more comfortable, certainly a place I'm more comfortable with. You tend to speak in more technical jargon. Unfortunately, at C-suite level, all this does is blind them with science. They don't like that. Essentially, you being the cleverest person in the room generally means that everybody else in the room resents you somewhat. So you need to be able to express, find out essentially what their need is from within that and what their want is from that, and then express the engineering through those through that lens.
No, I think that's really important. I think the don't boil the ocean thing as well. It's something that, like, I think I should definitely take that advice on hand myself. It's trying to take on too many things at one point is you end up kind of half-assing almost most of it then instead of putting your focus into what's the priority at that situation. And kind of on that as well, you mentioned like the or Mike, sorry, you mentioned about like micromanagement, that you end up, because you don't want to, you end up wanting to focus on doing everything correctly, and you know that you can do it correctly. So instead of delegating, is there a balance that you can make between like giving developers and engineers autonomy versus like micromanagement? Is there a balance you can make between both, or do you reckon it's you're kind of stuck in either or?
You absolutely have to, otherwise, you're just going to sink really. And, developing these workflows, I think it's a sign of maturity, and, just building on what Ed said over there with, you can't boil the ocean, is for me two things which the biggest winners is the zero mail inbox policies. I'm not sure if anyone using, but not having any mail in your inbox, meaning that you read it, you archive it. If you need to come back to it, you put some timer so it pops back up, but you never have emails in your inbox. Emails is a very big distractor. So that policy was a huge change for me. And as well, just a casual to-do app. So anything comes up, you put it into do, everything comes up, you put it into do, and then having a way of managing those to-dos, and just coming in the morning, looking at the top, what is the highest priority, and just doing them that day. And just, having that workflow, and, just once you develop it well, it's, you cannot really go without it. You cannot just come to a day in the office and see, what's going to happen. Like you have a flow of work. So that's how you manage your work. And then, once it overfills, and once you have more than 4 to 5 important things, you start forgetting things. It's just like you cannot hold in your head like 12 huge things for 6 different people across the business. Like you have to put it somewhere. But once you start getting a queue of to-dos much longer than you can hold it in your head, you're gonna stop sort of like dropping a ball and forget things. So that's where the delegation helps you very well. You look at the whole map of things you're responsible, you have to do this quarter, and you go like, who could do what and who could help you with. And you start delegating. And delegation itself, finding that spot where people are challenged a little bit, they stretched with that piece of delegation, but they're not overly stretched, so they actually fall in a situation where they freeze because they just don't know what's going on too much. So finding that spot and delegating away is a must.
Definitely. And Eoin, in your career, do you have a way of prioritizing as well who you come to for certain things, or how the workflow that you have to do throughout the day?
Yeah, I think like prioritization and time management are like pretty key things that hit you on the head when you kind of move up. And it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I think for me, the main realization is understanding that you're not going to do everything on the to-do list. And so the key thing is, as you say, Mike, making sure you have a to-do list and it goes on there, and then being able to say like, okay, well, I'm just going to do these. This is what's important here. And I guess, just to kind of feed back into the other point about kind of delegation and micromanagement, I think you're always on this balance, as you say, of trying to push people just enough. But I think you're also on this balance of trying to shift just enough off your plate. Often you're going to have the best insight into how to do something and the way to do something, but you're not going to have enough time to work out all the things that need to be done and how it needs to be done. So you're endlessly trying to give people more responsibility and train them up and make them better engineers, and while at the same time trying to minimize your work. So you're always playing this kind of game between doing just enough management, but also trying to offload and give people more autonomy. while at the same time choosing what not to do, I guess, to kind of, yeah, I'd say.
Exactly, yeah, because that's the big thing that I come across when I speak to engineers every day is that they don't want to be micromanaged, that they want to be in autonomous roles. And then when I speak to CTOs and clients for filling a role, they want people who can work autonomously and don't need to be micromanaged. So it seems like a general thing that nobody wants to have done. But how do you deal with maybe an engineer who maybe needs that micromanagement? Like what do you, what's the line for you guys when you're like, okay, you actually need to stick on top of this person to make sure the work is done, first of all, correctly, and then second of all in time as well. Ed?
So I think fundamentally you have to trust your knowledge workers. You have to trust that your process is robust enough to have either the right people in place or to catch those when they fall. People who are afraid to fail invariably will. It's a famous quote, ancient Greece, and used by Machiavelli. And fundamentally, if you don't trust your knowledge workers, then that makes all of your delegation absolutely painful. It's a really difficult process through that. However, there are going to be things, nobody can know everything the moment they set eyes on it. There are going to be things where you might have the benefit of experience. Textbook may say one thing, and we all know that the textbook has been written by people who maybe haven't any real world application of that. So create a walled garden fundamentally, so that they are safe to play within that walled garden and have the freedom to roam as they want. But you make sure that they can't wander into the stinging nettles or the rose patch, and that they can't steal all the fruit from the orchard. And then pair with them, sit down with them, actually give them your time, give them the benefit of that knowledge. You shouldn't be creating everything from scratch, but equally there are going to be some things where you go, yeah, this has the shape or feel of this. I think let's sit down and let's work through some of this stuff together. Give them that time, and then trust that you've pointed them in the right direction. Create a situation where you have a constant feedback loop as well. Have those blameless postmortems, and blameless being the operative, so that essentially this is what happened. This is how we stop this from happening again. This is how we can then make sure that we put enough guardrails in place so that effectively those things, and then update your systems. There's no point in having this is our fixed mode and this is the mold and everybody will form into this mold, because unfortunately that's not particularly agile, and it doesn't actually deal with the nuance of the working day. And fundamentally engineering is about problem solving. The problems of each time are going to be different, although they may have the shape and feel of it. And I guess to maybe limit that bottleneck, don't attend every meeting. Just don't. Is it actually of time? Is it worth essentially the money? Could somebody cheaper go? And can you delegate that responsibility to one of your more junior developers or to somebody else to then report back to the group? Empowering people in that way, where they take on that role of being the engineer in the room for those particular meetings, means that you do free up some of your time. Just because it's a blank space in your calendar doesn't mean it's free time. So effectively delegate those.
Just something you mentioned there about kind of guiding, like always keeping up with the times and guiding your engineers to make sure that you're helping them kind of change and reflect on what they're doing. Just in terms of your own development and everything, how important is it for you guys to be self-reflective about your own abilities as well, and making sure that you're changing with the times? Like Mike, has that been a factor to your success so far, like always kind of reflecting on your own management, your own career?
So before I come to this, just maybe to build on the micromanagement piece, I think it's a bad word, but so let me rephrase. So I love the trust but verify saying, right? So you're always trusting your team and you're trusting individuals, what they're doing, but that autonomy, it's almost gradually grows when it comes to how senior you are within the team. So I don't like to go in and say like, look, you know, you're quite junior, you know, you're very good, you know, you're gonna learn stuff, but giving you autonomy right now to build important things and you know, potentially go to conferences, get inspired by, you know, by the newest tech, you know, bring that back to the team and suddenly start, you know, bringing in microservices or, you know, building something like that. That might be a problem eventually, right? So you need to think a little bit more from business perspective, how you're going to maintain that code, you know, how that's going to plug in everything else. So maybe it's less autonomy and more autonomy, you know, the more senior you are, and the more senior you are, you actually as a professional, you expect people to sort of leave you alone and allow you to play your tools. So if we're talking about more junior candidates or employees and your knowledge workers, I would say trust, you know, but verify. So not micromanagement, but still space, but maybe a little bit less space. So you still look at what they do. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, coming to the next point now, I forgot where we're asking Sam. So give me that.
No, it was just about self-reflection really, and how important that is for yourself, and like obviously changing with the times and making sure that you are always 100%. Improving.
Yep. So playing into your natural strength, I think it's a very overlooked element within organizations in general. So I like to be academic about this. So I do, you know, these psychology tests, and Gallup has a very, you know, well respected, you know, schema of just going through those questions and realizing what you're actually good at by default. And it's always a trade-off. If you're good at something, on the other spectrum, you're going to be bad at something. So giving you an example, I'm quite competitive as a person. So I can push things forward and I can inspire people around me, you know, let's go people, let's gonna get this done. But the trade-off is I have very little patience. Because I'm not patient, you know, that doesn't rub well sometimes within the team when I'm like, let's go, let's do this, you know, we have 2 weeks, let's push it. Some people don't respond well to that. So, you know, being aware of when and how to play what you're actually good at, you know, is important. And as well, a lot more, what's the word, important tender? Realizing that you have a trade-off, right? And avoiding your weaknesses, you know, and not creating more problems. That's where self-reflection plays in.
And for yourself, Eoin, like since you've been a manager now for a while, do you reckon you've changed a lot through self-reflection on when you first started managing to now?
Yeah, I think I think there's kind of two kind of ways you evolve. Some is through kind of conscious kind of reflection, and at other times you just kind of look back and you realize, oh wait, I'm doing this completely different to how I was. So I think, you know, a lot of things happen very incrementally as you just kind of, you know, you've got 100 different ways you kind of try things out, and then eventually something settles into a pattern that just kind of works, and you stop thinking about it. So I think in that way, we're all always constantly evolving. But then I think kind of there's also a more conscious reflection, which I think is much harder when you're in a role. I think often you might leave like a role, and then kind of look back once you've kind of properly stepped away from it and kind of think, okay, what did go wrong here? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? And that's very easy to do. But what's harder is once you take these learnings and maybe you beat yourself up a little bit, then it's actually bringing them forwards with you. And that can be quite hard. So you might go and be like, oh, I wasn't saying no to enough stuff in this role, and I took on far too much, and I made all these mistakes. And you identify it once you've got the distance. But it's about actually really being able to take that forward and action it, which I think is the harder piece, for me at least.
What do you think, Ed, as well on that point?
So I mean, yeah, I think I boil everything down to a capacity management aspect. I do this for my teams, I do this for myself. Fundamentally, if you block everything out to 100%, you're going to go bust the moment somebody goes, can I just have 5 minutes of your and you're like, but I already had all of these plans for everything else. That's broken my calendar for the next week. So I tried to stick to a 65-35 planned unplanned work ratio. 65% of it will be plans, 35% of it will be those floating points. It doesn't mean you don't do the work. It just means that those are not defined units of work to be delivered. It works with developers and it works in management as well. I think you sort of starting out early, you end up with that sort of almost imposter syndrome, almost that I can't believe they've actually allowed me the keys to the castle aspect of it. Do they actually know what I am and who I am and everything else? My word, if they find out, then it's all going to come tumbling down around my ears. Whereas you end up with an experience teaches you. This has the feel of, this has a flavor of, and eventually you get to that point of going, yes, actually. And the way I guess I do that is I train, I go on regular courses. I think the joy of this job for me and why it's I've spent 26 years playing around with technology fundamentally is that every 5 years everything changes, everything gets burned away into the ether, and the only things that stay with you really are the standards and practices. Linguistics change, the methods of doing things. Certainly at the moment we're going through a bit of a resurgence of some techniques which I've seen before, but they're now called new things. Sometimes it's a relabeling rather than an application of anything new. And then find out what your golden path is. You are not going to be good at everything. So just as you would create a developer golden path where you only support certain things within your own managerial style and everything else, create your own golden path. Say, these are the areas that I'm strong in, these are the areas I'm weak in. Now, some of those areas you can train and learn and improve. Some of those areas you are always going to be rubbish at them. Me getting expenses in on time, I'm always going to be pants. It's just not happening. I just cannot organize that effectively. As long as I know the budget, then they will get done and it will get done. Whereas, you know, sitting down and doing boxes and lines and working out the infrastructure of something, I can probably do that in my sleep. And it's just working out what your golden path is, and then maybe being able to say, actually, I'm going to need to apply myself more to this. I'm going to actually block out some time in the calendar to do this. And then get round feedback, get that 100% 360 feedback. Make sure your team is feeding back and create that policy of there are no stupid questions here. There are no sort of wrong answers in this if you feel that you can do that, and empower your team to speak up, because you can guarantee if a couple of your team are disgruntled by that, there's probably other people, but they're just too polite to say anything, or because of the position you hold, they won't say anything because it might affect their career.
You mentioned there a few things that are being relabeled that have been in the past. So what are those type of things?
I'm just looking at sort of the way that the front-end libraries now, we've sort of gone through the whole cycle of outsourcing everything and then insourcing everything again now with the hybrid working patterns, looking at the different sort of JavaScript technologies. I'll put my teeth back in. Coming in and around, and the way that everything was Node, everything was being pushed out through that. Micro front ends, which we've done before. Micro applications as an extension to that. Again, things that have happened before. I think going almost back to the golden path, it isn't that there is the right solution, there is the appropriate solution for that time, given time and money are the equations here. And fundamentally developing those things are actually, this is the right solution for this. It's not necessarily the right answer. I think that with the experience you suddenly realize that there are no right answers. There is just the answer that is right now effectively.
Just on that, no right answers and no one way of doing things. Like, just it's a tiny bit off topic, but with remote working being so popular now these days as well, has it been difficult to kind of make sure not to make sure that everyone is doing their work, but to make sure that everything kind of is getting done on time with remote working, compared to when everyone was in the office and you could see everyone doing the work in it and all that? Has it made much of a change for you guys since you've been managing?
I think largely, for me at least, it's been a case actually the remote working has rewarded the engineering side of things. The wonderful thing about open plan offices is you can have that sort of meerkat moment of going, oh, I've just heard that you're doing this. No, don't do that, because that will blow everything up that we're just doing over here, or we're about to release a patch for that, or we're going to do this, or that's a really great idea, but we need to think about it in more of these terms. It's great for that sort of meerkat moment of sticking your head up and looking around and everything else. But as a developer experience, it's appalling. You need that zone of concentration fundamentally. You need a level of being able to get into your concepts and your mind maps and your mental image of what you're doing. And if somebody walks up to you halfway through you constructing some piece of architecture in your head, goes, can I just have 5 minutes at a time? Then what happens is all of that sort of disappears into the ether. And you go, but I've just spent an hour creating that mental model in my head in order to be able to get to this point that we need to deliver this. And so open plan offices really aren't great for that. Working from home, working remotely has enabled that. I think also it opens your doors to much more talent. You're not geographically bound to a certain area where you can only get at certain salaries, at certain capacities and certain abilities. It allows you to go, actually, we've got a great developer over here, and we've got a great developer over here, and we've got one down here, and they can communicate and speak to each other and converse through all of the relevant messaging apps and video conferencing and everything else. It's still essential to have a touchstone point, a meeting point where you get your teams together, because that does build the camaraderie in a different way as well. But I don't think it's an essential part of the everyday work for engineering. I think for other areas, then it is a much more or socially orientated, shall we say, a field of work. And so therefore you do need that face-to-face time.
Definitely, and Eoin, I'd be interested to hear what you your point as well. Considering you're at an early stage startup, has it been culture-wise? Is it difficult to kind of build that engineering culture within a kind of remote team, or how have you found it?
Yeah, so my team's actually all in London, but I'm mostly in Bristol and only occasionally in London. But I was in London for the first kind of 2 years at Edyn. But I think for us, so we're not really, we're kind of mostly hybrid. And for sure, on the culture piece, that's by far the most important reason for me to stay co-located. You know, just kind of going down the pub and having lunch together and all this stuff. So I think now people are spending less time in the office, but we have this very tight team that all get on really well. And I don't know if we all started remote, if we could have got there. But then kind of back on Ed's point about how being remote is great for engineers. I definitely agree there. We were having a big conversation across the company about going kind of fully remote across all different departments. And we kind of went around and we all kind of talked about what would be the issues within our department of going remote. And I'm there like, well, everything's a GitHub issue, everything's a pull request. Like when I review someone's code, 90% of the time I do it without speaking to them. And every now and then I want to speak to them. And if I'm not in the office, it's like, oh, let's jump on a Zoom. If I'm in the office, I say, hey, let's just talk through this. It's easier to do it, you know, sync. And so much of our processes, and I'm always pushing people to document things, whether it's an issue or a commit message or a Slack message, or you know, make a document. You know, it depends on the context. But when you're remote, it actually pushes you to do more of this stuff. But then this documentation, it's the best practice if you're sat next to each other. You know, if you're sat next to someone, you shouldn't tell them how something works. You should say, oh, is it not on the README? Okay, this is how it works, but would you also mind updating the README? So actually being remote kind of forces you to communicate in a better way for an engineering team, which isn't necessarily true for, you know, outside of engineering, I would say.
I agree with the having everything written down part as well. I am a big advocate for having everything documented, and even for systems and everything. If it's not written, it's not fact, or if it's not tracked, it's not fact. So it's very hard. It's much easier to track everything, communicate if everything is well documented, I feel. Mike, on that point, you've worked in both remote and in-person roles. Like, have you? What's your kind of opinion on that?
Well, where, you know, documentation is the value, you know, I would challenge this by asking a question: how many times you actually went to documentation to find an answer where you had a question in a fully remote setting? I feel like it's a little bit, you know, over maybe estimated. in the sense of how much value you have to document. But when people need solutions, they're likely going to go on Slack and go, who knows what, and they'll find a person to talk with rather than actually go and go through documentations. Documentations work very well for onboarding, and when you're scaling, like, you need to have that in your process, because people come and go, and if people with the knowledge leave, the documentation becomes how you know about systems, when time goes. So I like hybrid. I'm not a big fan of fully remote, to be honest. I understand all the economic values and talent attraction and sourcing values, but in my experience, I feel like people doing remote need to take responsibility on realizing that remote is a different operational mode than being in office, and realize that entering a remote role, if you never did that before, has a challenges for you as employee, because the communication, collaboration, knowledge sharing patterns are different, and it's different. So coming into remote role and going like, I'm just going to come in and do my job, you're likely not going to be doing that well if you don't really know how to do remote well. And it's a sort of two-directional street for the businesses to make sure their interview process accounts for understanding if people know how to do remote well, and for employees, spending some time to looking at the best practices of remote work and coming into interviews or looking for remote roles is a shared responsibility, which I think if both sides do that well, then the business will see much more value of, for the remote, and the challenges which is coming from a global market towards the remote working will likely fade. But currently, I see, I follow this trend as a topic, and I see so much pull back into offices, which is happening right now. They, attacking remote, and they're saying it doesn't build social connections. You're not going to bump in the decision makers. If you're sitting at home, you're not going to progress your career. And all these facts are, fairly true, right? So it's, and, as well, we have so much equity and money in the offices in London, especially. So hard to think that, people will be sort of allowed to stay remote. Like there's going to be some type of pull, which is, I think it's happening already. And in my opinion, the sweet spot is the hybrid. People get space in engineering, which is so needed for concentration, especially if you work on complex things. But at the same time, maybe you come once or twice in the office, so you build connections. You can have good alignment sessions. And yeah, I think a hybrid would be my choice as an operational mode.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think I'm a people person, so I like to be around people, but it's a completely different job that I have than you guys. So I don't really need to concentrate as hard on technical jargon and everything, which is probably helps my brain a lot more in a hybrid setting. Just on about
just to maybe cap that off, I think the thing which isn't necessarily experienced by businesses or realized by businesses is the commute in and the commute home, the factors of actually getting to and from the office in order to undertake the work, fundamentally requires time out of the individual's time. It's also tiring. It's the physical aspect. You have to get up and be in the office at a certain time and everything else, and then the office may well close at a certain time as well. And that actually, if you're not managing the capacity well, you're actually then burning out your engineers through essentially making them attend an office, by virtue of the fact that essentially that is having a compound effect on their effectiveness. When I was at Kingfisher, we did a study on the actual time lost, and effectively if you may overwork somebody after 8 hours for more than a day or so, then you fundamentally lose them for another 3 days. Their quality of work will drop off for another 3 days. So those time factors of actually wearing people out by actually causing them to go into the office and everything else also need to, I think, be factored in within that, in order to just make sure you're optimizing what you get out of your developers.
As well, very expensive, very expensive. I personally, bought a house away from London. So for me, coming to London is like 50 quid a day. So it's not only, the time which takes me an hour, but as well, it eats away quite a lot from a salary. So I mean, it's great, what effectively had said, you know, it's for engineers and software developers and anything engineering related, cloud architects, all of that. It's great, but not for everybody, not for all the business, you know, streams and flows.
Yeah, I live about a 10-minute walk from my office, so it's a bit of a difference than traveling into London every day. Just on actual engineering mistakes that you might have made in your career and everything, hiring is a big factor in that of a manager. Has there been times where, obviously you don't have to name names or anything, but has there been points in your career where you may be hired for technical ability over cultural fit, and it made a huge difference, or vice versa? Ed?
So I've spent the last 15 years or so essentially largely interviewing people and going through that process. I have a fairly high success rate in the people that I've hired.
Mhm.
The notable ones that have maybe not been as successful, they've been a type 2 success. I describe a type 2 success as something you learn never to do again. So it's still a success. It's just a different type of success. And the individual was meticulous. They were being hired as a tester. They were meticulous, wonderful QA regime. Absolutely spotless in terms of how they could see the attention to detail. It also meant that they were utterly inflexible, to the point that they, about 3 weeks into the role, all of those traits sort of surfaced in a way which meant that they had a stand-up fight with the rest of their team and drove a laptop through a desk. And were then promptly asked to leave the building. And at the time, they were hired for the exact meticulous level of their nature. Sadly, that meticulous level played out in every aspect of their life, and did result in that. So lessons learned is not necessarily the perfect on paper.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Do other Owen? Do you have a point on that as well?
Yeah, I think it's quite a specific question. Like I would say that generally I try not to hire people I wouldn't like to work besides. Maybe that's just kind of prioritizing my own enjoyment as much as anything. But I think I generally haven't kind of under prioritized culture fit to a large extent. But I would say kind of more broadly, the worst hires I've made, and there has been quite a few over the years in different roles, they're always the ones where you're a bit unsure, but you just haven't had the right applicants, and you've got this deadline and it's been going on too long and you haven't got enough time to do more interviews, and you don't want to start the process again. And you're just, because there's a few kind of niggles and you're like, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. And then 3 months later, you've got, you know, they've left a mess. You've got to do it all again anyway. So for me, that's the biggest mistake that I've made hiring is ignoring those little niggles and kind of pushing past them.
Have they been niggles with personality, or more like their technical stuff?
I think, you know, it might be their technical stuff. They might have completely flunked something in a weird way that didn't really make sense. Or it could be a kind of personality thing where most of they seem fine, but there was a few like a bit like, was that, you know, a few red flags or something. But it's always, you know, people who disqualify themselves. They do something or say something or they don't tick certain boxes, and that's fine. It's when you know that it's the wrong hire, but you can't quite place your finger on it, so you go ahead anyway.
Those could be the most difficult, because you don't really know what they're like until they're working next to you sometimes, which is very difficult to find out. What are you going to say, Ed? Sorry?
I was going to say, if it's not an F yes, then it's a hell no. For me, and you can always find somebody else. I guess don't hire yourself. Don't hire somebody with your skill sets. You're already there. Not because you're afraid of being replaced, but because you probably things that are going to augment yourself.
And Mike, do you have a point on that?
Yeah. It takes experience to not make these mistakes, or less you have someone helping you. From my perspective, I tend to look at, you know, social skills a lot more. So, and as well to not look at a single individual. I mean, there's likely a vacancy profile, you know, you're trying to pull in some type of skill, you know, for that role, but, you know, teams perform. Individuals alone, they can be the best they can be, but if the team is not functioning, you know, he's not going to be doing his best. So every hire is an addition to the team. So you're building a team. So I try to look at the individual from a social skills, and I like, you know, there's a book by Patrick Lencioni called The Ideal Team Player. So he gives sort of like a recipe of how you can, you know, look at people and realize if they're going to be a good team players or not. So that's sort of my go-to approach when it comes to hiring. First is to realize how good as a team play, you know, you will be and how well you're going to enable that team to perform. And then looking at the hard skills as a secondary, because they are easily taughtable, meaning that, you know, when people come in and if you have a guy senior knows the knowledge and, you know, they've been in tech in the background, they will pick up new technologies, you know, quarter or two, you know, along the way, and they will give that value. But if they have character traits which just doesn't allow them to gel with the team, and AKA they're not a team player, that's not taughtable. That's just a person. So that's where that cultural fit comes in play, and then you'll be like, you just don't fit, and, you know, then you're going to have that problem. So for me, the go-to is, you know, are you a team play, and then let's look at your hard skills as a second, and how well you know match up against what we actually need. The second point, which I wanted to build on Eoin's point about you know, hiring because you have a deadline and, you know, you don't want to restart the process. So I have a notion of not compromising on a quality bar, because you know, it's like you go like, you know, that team's going to be, you know, this, and yes, sometimes you get the pressure and, you know, the business, we need headcount and all of that. But what that said, you know, you're always going to find the person. You know, it might be longer that you want, but making that mistake and compromise on your vision of a team and quality bar, it almost always backfires.
It's never short.
Definitely. And what was that, Ed?
It's never shorter. It's never quicker. You always leads to pain.
Definitely, and I think it's like you said there, Mike, about the factors that you can't teach, those uncoachable things. It's the same in recruitment, and I've seen it from old colleagues and new colleagues and people that come in and leave. Sometimes you can't teach the soft skills that are like the resilience factor, or is this person going to be able to persevere in the hard times when it's tough, and it's the same in engineering, and especially when you're working at maybe smaller companies, especially where you can't really hide behind the rest of your staff members because it's a smaller team. I think it's very transferable, all those skills, and that's where the communication factor comes in as well. And I'm sure you've, in your careers, you're probably much better at the communication now than when you first started off in management. Was it tough to, like, back to one of your first points, Mike, going for, like, when you went from an individual contributor to obviously being in charge of people, like, was that a tough transition from to have that communication skills, like a must have at that point?
Yeah, that's a very good shout, Sam, and that's one of my top mistakes, you know, in that list, being able to communicate effectively and communicate it in a way that it, you know, sparks an action from the people who actually, you know, receive the emails. And as well, you know, we always are middle layer management. So that means we're communicating down to our team and we're communicating up, you know, to the CEOs or MDs. So we'll always sit in the middle. So being able to communicate and change communication styles, that's something you eventually develop, but it really, you know, someone can guide you in a sense of, like, you know, try this, you know, maybe read this book, maybe check that blog, but it really is experience of communicating, getting that feedback about your communication, you know, seeking out that feedback and just, you know, working out how you actually communicate effectively. Yeah, it needs to
definitely. That definitely comes with with experience as well, because that emotional intelligence is something you kind of have to grow on, and that's where self-reflection comes in as well, which is quite tough. Obviously, it takes some people a lot longer to grow that emotional intelligence, but I'm sure it's definitely one of those, definitely trainable, I feel. What about for yourself, Owen? Do you reckon like your communication has improved since you started, and was that something you had to work on when you first became like a team, had to manage a team?
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I find difficult. I think you make a bunch of decisions in your head, and then you start kind of actioning these in a lot of different little ways. And you might have full timelines for a project or two projects like mapped out in your head, and you've kind of allocated engineers like 2 weeks down the line. And then the CEO comes and says, why the hell haven't you given me timelines for this project? And you're just there like, oh, we started it 2 weeks ago, and I just didn't tell anyone we started it. So like there's that level, which I definitely struggle with, because I do need to let things ruminate and bounce around, and I'm you can't go straight to a decision on a lot of stuff, so you let things bounce around, but then once they fall into place, you forget to stop and be like, oh, that thing that I was thinking about is now being clarified. And this can be the same of just like laying out a roadmap for your team, or just things are always evolving and changing, and it's like, when do you take stock and realize that other people's understanding of reality is misaligned with your own? So I don't know, these are all things that I've definitely kind of got better at, just by kind of actually putting in like processes in place. It's like once every 3 months we look at the roadmap, we realize that it's changed, and we go and we build it again, and we share it, and we do a presentation. So for me, actually just getting moments into your day, week, month, quarter, year, where you're like, okay, like I'm going to communicate these things to these people. For me, that's the only way I'll be able to get it to work. So yeah, that's me on communication.
Definitely, and I feel like those some great points as well, and it's one of those the biggest things I feel like with communication, and I'm sure it's difficult as well when you're like I said, or like Mike said, going from just worrying about your own work to worrying about other people's work, and then on top of it and then you have to kind of like you said there, Eoin, you have to let people know that you're doing stuff, because you can't just do stuff by yourself as well, which is tough as well. Ed, do you have a point on that kind of communication level and the kind of difficulty?
I think fundamentally I was excellent at talking to engineers when I started this game. The technical wasn't the problem. It was then communicating into the board and mistakenly believing that if I came with the right technical solution, that then everybody would essentially fall down and go, oh, well, this is genius. We should definitely worship at the altar of technology, and we should definitely respect this immediately. Whereas actually finding out that thing that they want to hear in that conversation, in that meeting, as an outcome, and actually discovering that, making sure that people have pre-reads for stuff that is in non-engineering speak, broken down in simplistic terms. Nobody wants to know how you effectively resolve a binary level problem. Everybody wants to know at a high level, this is taken care of, I've got hold of it, the team has got it, or we need this, or we need this. Find out what the demands are of the conversation, find out what the demands are of the meeting. Try and deliver to that. Don't over deliver on an engineering level unless you're speaking to engineers. They just nobody cares enough about the technology, not in a negative way, but it's just that's not their will, that's not their bag, that's not where they are at in terms of that. So it's superfluous. Celebrate the successes as well.
Yes, I was actually going to make that point. Yes,
communicate out where your team has achieved, where your area of the company has achieved, where you have achieved within that. Don't be afraid to blow your own horn with that, not in a sort of arrogant, well, this is just I'm the rest of you people are just down there, down the mountain, but more from an actual point of view of saying, look, we are doing this. And ringing that bell often means that actually people look at the engineering teams, look at the job that you're doing in a different light as well. They have confidence in it. They have a belief that you can actually deliver when you say you're going to deliver. And I guess the final one would be provide good estimates and make those estimates dependable and reliable when you do that. So if you cannot give a how long is a piece of string answer to a problem, then by all means make it consistent enough that you can say, actually, this will take about this amount of time, energy, money, effort in order to deliver this, and make that dependable. Report those metrics back, and then back it up with stats. Just report all of your metrics, not as a micromanagement process, but just almost as a look at this sheet of numbers. These are the important numbers. These are important for these reasons. Now we have these. See how they're going in an upward curve. That's a good thing. So that can be communicated out to everybody else as well, so that then they have something to say. It's almost the bragging rights. Other managers, other board levels like to go to things and say, well, this department is doing blah, 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 blah in this successful way, because that then essentially is almost a shared honor and shared glory in the terms.
Yeah, I think celebrating success is really important, and obviously to the upper management to show how well your team is doing, but also to tell your team how well they're doing as well, if they are performing well. Because I know just from my own experience at places, I don't know if it's a vanity thing on my point where I like to be told I'm doing well or something, but it helps though with motivation and throughout the team, and kind of celebrating like, let's say someone does really well, and might motivate another person to kind of work to get that, either that praise or to get up to that level as well, which is really important. So I'm just conscious of time a small bit, but does anyone have any other points they'd like to make this evening?
Maybe as a closing one, we've got a few minutes, so I think it's quite important to have a coaching or a mentor if you're looking at your career seriously. And people find ways of learning by themselves, but I think it's highly overlooked how much you're going to accelerate your career if you're going to have a mentor or a coach giving you effectively answers, or helping you to reach the answers, and having conversations. And on that side, it doesn't need to be someone external. You might find that within the business. Think about who you're actually reporting with, and try to proactively seek out feedback in your one-to-ones or just different sessions. Is like, how are you doing? How is your communication? How is the team doing in their eyes? And just try to see how they see, and just get that feedback and try to grow from it. And then at the same time realize how your feedback is important to your team and your direct reports, and why you need to give that. Giving a positive praise is actually quite easy, but sadly I don't see that enough, to be honest. It's one of the main things how you actually influence people, just showing a general interest in them and actually giving a positive praise. When it comes to constructive feedback, that's what actually makes people grow. It's an important feedback to give, and often new managers and leaders actually shy from it because it's not an easier, it's not easy conversation. You want to look at certain behaviors, and you want to, maybe do some pattern matching, where you see 1, 2, 3 times it comes out, and you think that, they could do better. Giving that feedback in one-to-one and allowing them to grow from it, it's equally important.
I think with as long with giving feedback, it's always tough to tell someone that they're not maybe doing something right or anything. But I think what's really important, especially if you're managing younger developers or younger engineers, is make it constructive, which is really important. Like, let's say it's something really bad, at least being kind of not sugarcoating it in any way, but helping them realize that they can grow from this, and it's not the end of the world with small things as well. I think it's a really, really good point. But yeah, does anyone else have a point on that, on Mike's point?
Yeah, I think cultivate the emotional maturity enough to say when something's wrong, actually speak out at that point, and do it in a way which is going to have the best resolution for that. calling somebody out, shouting across an office, "What idiot has done this?" Probably not the best way to deal with it. Having a conversation where it's never really start that conversation with, "Can I have a quick word?" Because that never sets alarm bells in somebody's head. But more, we have time, let's discuss this issue and how we might resolve this issue. Be direct in that. And have the emotion and maturity to actually approach that in a compassionate and kind way, without blame.
Definitely, I think those are all fantastic points today. Just wanted to say thank you to the three of you guys, Mike, Eoin, and Ed, for jumping on this evening. I've had a fantastic chat. That hour went very, very quickly today. So the full recording will be available on our YouTube and our LinkedIn. I'll send all three of you guys a link as well. But I just wanted to say thank you very much again for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you all have a fantastic evening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah,
It was
thank
great.
you, gentlemen.
Cheers,
Nice to meet
everyone.
you both.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye bye.